It all starts with a cup of tea. Seriously, think about your morning routine. Maybe you grab a coffee, maybe a tea. For millions in 19th century Britain, tea was a national obsession, a daily ritual that defined their culture. They were importing millions of pounds of tea every year. But here's the problem. All that tea came from one place, China, a global superpower that played by its own rules. It wasn't interested in what the British had to offer. That created a massive trade imbalance. The British were hemorrhaging silver, the only thing China would accept. Imagine an empire-sized piggy bank draining coin by coin, ship by ship. Officials and merchants grew desperate. They needed something the Chinese would buy. The solution was dark, destructive, and diabolically profitable. It was opium. Grown in colonial India, it could unlock China's markets. This brings us to a single ship, a British East India Company clipper. Its hold wasn't filled with cotton or wool. It was packed with chests of opium. That ship marked a turning point, a vessel carrying a catalyst for conflict that would plunge a nation into crisis and spark two devastating wars, changing history for Britain and China. To really get what's happening, we need to zoom out. On one side, you have the Qing dynasty in China. For centuries, China had seen itself as the center of the civilized world. It was vast, ancient, and largely self-sufficient. Foreigners were viewed with suspicion. Trade was heavily restricted, confined to a single port, Canton. On the other side of the world, you have Great Britain, an empire experiencing a radical transformation. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing. Factories are churning out goods, and Britain's navy is projecting its power across the globe. This is an empire built on trade, fueled by ambition, and convinced of its own superiority. They were relentless, constantly seeking new markets. These two worlds were on a collision course. China's steadfast isolationism was about to slam head-on into Britain's aggressive global expansionism. It was a clash of civilizations. The Chinese wanted to maintain their traditional order. The British believed they had the right to trade with anyone, anywhere, for anything. This story is more than just a history lesson. The Opium Wars carved deep scars, kicking off what China calls the Century of Humiliation, and its echoes still reverberate in today's headlines. Let's dig deeper into this trade problem. The British had an insatiable thirst for Chinese goods, not just tea but also luxurious silks and exquisite porcelain. The British would arrive hoping to sell their goods, like woolen textiles. But the Chinese had little interest. So the British ships would leave with their holds full of tea, but they had to pay for it all with one thing: silver. Hard, cold, silver currency. For the Qing dynasty, this was policy. A steady inflow of silver was essential for the health of their economy. But for the British, it was a disaster. The severe trade deficit was draining their national treasury. This wasn't just an economic headache. It was a matter of national pride and imperial stability. They saw this one-way flow of wealth as a critical weakness. They were trapped. They couldn't stop buying tea without causing social unrest and a fiscal crisis at home. The pressure mounted on the East India Company, the mega corporation that held a monopoly on the China trade, to find a solution. They needed a product that the Chinese masses would desire, something that could reverse the silver drain, something addictive. The British East India Company turned to a solution they had been cultivating in their Indian territories: opium. They established a highly profitable monopoly, refining the process to produce a more potent and addictive form of the drug specifically for export. The business model was cynically brilliant. The company would produce the opium but sell it to private traders, giving the company plausible deniability. The traders would anchor their ships at offshore islands, which became floating drug depots. Chinese smugglers would then row out, pay for the opium in silver, and distribute it through a vast and corrupt network. The impact on China was catastrophic. What had been a niche drug exploded into a nationwide epidemic, ravaging society from the highest officials to the poorest peasants. The silver that had once poured into China for tea was now flooding out to pay for opium. The British had reversed the silver drain. The Qing government was in a state of panic. They were facing a major public health crisis and an economic collapse. A fierce debate erupted. Legalize the trade or eradicate it? The decision they made would light the fuse for war. The Daoguang Emperor decided to act. The faction that argued for a complete eradication of the opium trade won the day. To lead this task, the emperor appointed Lin Zexu, a man of immense integrity and resolve. Upon arriving in Canton in March 1839, Commissioner Lin wasted no time. He was a man on a mission. He immediately ordered all foreign traders to surrender their entire stock of opium and blockaded the foreign factories, placing them under house arrest. This included the British superintendent, Charles Elliot, who found himself in an impossible position. To break the deadlock, Elliot agreed to Lin's demands, promising the merchants that the British government would compensate them for their losses. He had just placed a multi-million-dollar IOU on Queen Victoria's desk. In a spectacular display, Lin Zexu had over 20,000 chests of opium publicly destroyed. He didn't just burn it. He had his men dig trenches, fill them with opium, lime and salt, and then flood them with seawater. For Lin, it was a moral triumph. But for the British, the destruction of their property was the ultimate insult. The call for war became a deafening roar. Lord Palmerston and the war hawks won the debate in Parliament. An expeditionary force was dispatched to China, not to negotiate, but to teach the emperor a lesson. The first clash came in November 1839. After a standoff over a legal dispute, a British naval patrol clashed with Chinese junks at the Battle of Chunpi. The Royal Navy's cannons devastated the wooden ships. Several junks sank within minutes. The war had begun. The main British fleet arrived in June 1840. Instead of attacking Canton, they sailed north, blockading key ports and disrupting the Grand Canal to paralyze the Qing. The Qing court was thrown into disarray. The emperor blamed Lin Zexu for provoking the barbarians and had him dismissed and exiled. After failed talks, the British focused back on Canton, storming the Pearl River forts and positioning cannons to bombard the city. Local officials paid a ransom of $6 million silver to spare Canton from destruction. The British military advantage was overwhelmingly technological. Their most decisive weapon was a ship that became a symbol of the war, the Nemesis. The Nemesis let the British carry the war deep into China. In 1842, they launched a decisive campaign up the Yangtze River, cutting the empire in two. With the capital threatened, the Daoguang Emperor's will to fight finally broke. He had to sue for peace. In August 1842, the Treaty of Nanking was signed. It was the first of China's unequal treaties, dictated by the British. China had to pay a massive indemnity, open 5 treaty ports to foreign trade, and cede the island of Hong Kong to Britain in perpetuity. Crucially, it imposed extraterritoriality, meaning British citizens in China were not subject to Chinese law, a profound violation of Chinese sovereignty. The Treaty of Nanking did not, however, mention opium. But with the old enforcement system shattered, the opium trade exploded, becoming more profitable and widespread than ever before. The war was over, but the root cause remained, festering like an open wound and setting the stage for an even more devastating war to come. The excuse the British were looking for arrived in October 1856 in the form of a small ship called the Arrow. Chinese officials boarded the ship to arrest crew members. The aggressive British consul, Harry Parkes, claimed this was a grave insult to Britain. Though the pretext was flimsy, Parkes ordered the Royal Navy to bombard Canton, escalating the minor dispute into an act of war. Britain found an ally in France, who used the execution of a French missionary as their own pretext to join the war. An Anglo-French alliance was formed. The combined forces repeated the strategy from the First War, capturing Canton and then striking north, seizing the Taku forts. With the path clear, they occupied Tianjin, throwing the imperial court into a panic and forcing the emperor to negotiate. However, the Qing court resisted the new treaty. When diplomats returned in 1859, they were repulsed at the rebuilt Taku forts in a shocking defeat for the British. Enraged, the Allies returned in 1860 with a massive army. After outflanking the forts, they crushed the emperor's last line of defense in a tragic clash between a medieval army and an industrial one. With his last force annihilated, the Xianfeng emperor fled the capital, leaving his brother, Prince Gong, to face the invading armies. Before the city fell, a diplomatic party was ambushed and taken prisoner. Many were tortured and died horribly. In retaliation, the British commander, Lord Elgin, ordered the destruction of the emperor's private paradise, the old summer palace. After 2 days of looting, the troops set the entire complex ablaze. It was a calculated act of cultural destruction intended to humiliate the emperor. For China, it became an enduring symbol of foreign barbarism and national humiliation, a scar on the national psyche. With the capital at their mercy, Prince Gong capitulated completely, signing the Convention of Peking. The treaty ratified all previous demands, legalized the opium trade, and ceded more territory. It marked the beginning of what China calls the Century of Humiliation. This trauma, however, also planted the seeds of radical change, sparking decades of struggle that would eventually lead to the collapse of the Qing dynasty and the birth of modern China. The echoes of these wars are still with us today. The desire to erase this stain of humiliation became a powerful driving force, explaining China's fierce defense of its sovereignty and its quest to restore its place as a global power. The story of the Opium Wars is a stark reminder of how the events of the past continue to shape the present in ways we are still grappling with today. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.